Hello everyone, this is Livia here, aka Supervisor, and I'm really excited for this video because I'm going to be talking about my dissertation proposal presentation, which I didn't actually get to present because COVID happened and I was all prepped, ready to go, ready to present, and then, oh, camera's going to go a bit funny, there we go, we're back to normal, and then COVID happened, so I was unable to present, which was actually a shame because I was really excited to present it. So then we had to tweak this assignment a bit, and we still had to submit our presentation slides, but luckily it was only going to be a 5-minute presentation, but we were allowed to write scripts for it, and we were actually allowed to have our scripts with us to present our dissertation proposal, which I think is very fair because not only is the time limit very restricted, but also it's a bit unfair to try and force a student to memorise their dissertation proposal because it's quite a lot of work and effort went into this. But I'm just going to be looking down at my phone because I've taken screenshots of the slides, and I'm just going to sort of talk through it. So my dissertation proposal at this point was called Concepts of Blindness Within John Milton's Paradise Lost and Samson Agonisties. John Milton is a writer from the Renaissance period. I am terrible at dates, so I'm not going to quote specific dates, but as a rough kind of estimate, it's 1600s to late 1600s. It's the Renaissance period where everything is made new, reborn and made new, and the Tudor period, Elizabethan, Jacobean, all that kind of stuff. So, and John Milton, he was incredibly religious, and he was also quite a radical writer for his time because he wrote many treatises and he wrote epic poems, and he wrote many treatises, political tracts. I don't know, did he write treatises? I feel like I've just used the wrong word. I'll edit that out. But he wrote political tracts. The most famous one is probably the Tenure of Kings and Magistrates, which is basically objecting the divine right of kings, which was very much the prominent theory at the time that the monarch on earth acts as God's vessel or mouthpiece, which Milton was like, no, the king is mortal, he must answer to God as all his subjects do. He isn't above God, he is not aligned with God, God is superior, which was very interesting at the time because obviously you had the royalists who defended the monarchy, and Milton was very much of the camp of no, down with the monarchy. And I think he became the secretary, he had some kind of affiliation with Oliver Cromwell. Sorry, I've just noticed my cat has entered my room. Hello, Phoebe. Hello. She just entered. And one of the other interesting things about Milton was that he became blind, and he wrote prolifically on his blindness, and he actually wrote something called On My Blind. Was it On My Blindness? I can't remember the name of it, but How I Have Spent My Life. He's written many sonnets about his experience of being blind, and his critics obviously saw this as divine intervention and divine punishment from God for all the heathen things he was saying, because he also wrote divorce tracts. He wrote many interesting inflammatory things during his time, and he's very lucky that he wasn't executed, if we're being quite honest. But yeah, so the two texts of Milton that I'm interested in are Paradise Lost, which is his epic. I think they were written in 8 or 9 books, but then he divided one of the books to make 11 and 12, and actually he went blind, fully blind. It happened over a period of many years. He went fully blind during the time he was writing Paradise Lost, so he would actually dictate to his daughters for them to write it down on his behalf, which is insane because Paradise Lost is an amazing work. And then also the one that my lecturer recommended to me, who is hopefully going to be my potential supervisor, even though we don't actually get to pick, Samson Agonisties, which is a closet drama he wrote. It's also classed as a poem, but it's a closet drama, which means even though it's a drama, it was never intended to be performed in front of an audience or performed on stage. So those are the two primary texts that I'm interested in, and the concepts of blindness within them. My core research questions, I've sort of got rid of an aspect of this as I've developed it, which I'll explain in another video, the dissertation proposal and the literature review, because that's when you sort of start to go more in depth. But my sort of core research questions for this, I had, how do concepts of blindness impact Milton's figures, and what is the relationship between blindness and seeing? And then I changed physical blindness before I presented this or sent this in. I changed it to optical imagery, spiritual blindness, and visionaries, because for your dissertation you have to have 3 chapters. So those are the 3 concepts that I want to explore. And I wanted to have like a kind of overarching, but it's now not going to be an overarching thing. But I was also interested in like, how does Milton's own blindness influence his work? Because I've actually found in my preliminary research there are critics out there who believe Milton inserts his blind self into his work. So I thought I still feel it's like a significant factor that we can't overlook, because especially as he wrote extensively on it, I feel like it's too significant to not at least address, like in my introduction, that the fact he is blind himself is kind of like, I feel like it has significance or relevance, although obviously I know you have to be careful about authorial context, because you don't know the author personally and you never truly know their intentions unless they explicitly state it in their text. And then something our lecturer for this module recommended was obviously citing some of our preliminary research to kind of show where our thoughts were heading. So I used a quote from my preliminary text for the idea of my visionary chapter. And a visionary, this is what something I developed when a part of this, we had to go for a meeting with our potential supervisor. For your dissertation, you have to have a supervisor who has a specialism in your area to be able to help guide you. We don't get a say on who our supervisors are, but we were encouraged to go and speak and get some advice and share our ideas to see if it's a feasible project. And that's why I've got quite a bit of anxiety around this at the moment, because our English literature department is going through budget cuts, or claimed budget cuts, and our poor literature staff, they're trying to make 8 members out of our 13 members redundant, and they're trying to cut them. Obviously, if this happens, if our potential supervisors end up all being cut, then technically our dissertation projects could be rendered void, and that will be months of preliminary research and lots of effort down the drain. But we're not going to think about that right now. But that's why I'm a bit worried that I might not, because I feel so passionate about this project, and I'm really worried that I might not actually be able to get to do it. And if that happens, I might have a bit of a crisis. But it's all good. I'm sure it will be fine. But I picked a quote from Paradise Lost, book 3. So much, and this is from the narrator, so much the rather thou celestial light shine inward, and the mind through all her powers irradiate, there plant eyes, all mist from thence, purge and disperse, that I may see and tell of things invisible to mortal sight. So the narrator is kind of imploring God to plant internal eyes, because the narrator of Paradise Lost is blind, and they're post-lapsarian, which is a term that means after the fall. So Paradise Lost is about the fall of Adam and Eve, and it kind of tells that story. And it also has the characters of Satan and Milton's God, Milton's Satan and Milton's God, and Milton's Adam and Eve, and the archangels like Raphael and Uriel and Michael, and it's very interesting, but the concepts of blindness are what I'm really interested in. So I thought I would use this as a quote to support my concept of the emergence of a visionary, and that's a person who can see a higher truth that others cannot access, which I kind of got from my meeting with my potential supervisor, which was very helpful. And then for the next slide, I had Baruch, I think that's how you pronounce his name, who's a critic from 1975. The brilliantly shocking, almost grotesque quality of their plant eyes is not only the poet's recognition of his need for God's superior sight on the unconscious plane, it is also the final relief achieved by dissociating personal identity from a personal existence made all too plain by action, because Barrack is one of the critics that believes Milton has self-inserted in the blind poet figure himself, which I disagree with, but I said this quote is from one piece of preliminary research that I will potentially incorporate into my dissertation. I'm considering using it as a counter-argument as I disagree with the negative aspect of Milton's blindness that the critic is highlighting, because interestingly enough, and that's where I feel like my project has relevance, throughout history and throughout literature, blindness is time and time again presented as something that is negative, whereas I personally am arguing and believe that Milton does realistically highlight the negative aspects of blindness, but ultimately I believe Milton is showing that blindness is the key to accessing higher knowledge, and the connections that the blind characters are able to still retain with God kind of show that this connection, even if they believe it's lost, it isn't lost, and that God is always with them. So I feel like it's a positive thing rather than a negative thing, as many critics seem to argue that it's a negative thing. And then I did the same for Samson Agonisties. I got a quote from the Samson Agonisties text to show the visionary concept again. So, nor am I in the list of them that hope. This is a quote from Samson. Hopeless are all my evils, all remediless. This one prayer yet remains, might I be heard, no longer petition, speedy death, the close of all my miseries, and the balm. So Samson Agonistes is about the biblical figure Samson, so it's Milton's Samson. He retells the story of Samson, who was appointed by God at birth to destroy the Philistines, which was his tribe's enemies. But they capture him because he's betrayed by his Philistine wife Delilah. They capture him and blind him, and there's some discrepancies between Milton's Samson Agonistes and the actual biblical story. I'm not an expert on the Bible, so I don't know 100% what the biblical story of Samson is. I can't remember the differences between them. But for Milton's Samson, it's he's betrayed by his wife Delilah because God endowed his strength in his hair, and he tells Delilah this, and Delilah cuts his hair, and then she hands him over to the Philistine enemies, who capture him and blind him and make him a slave. So I feel this quote sort of supports how Samson is a visionary, because this one prayer. And Samson's the only character in Samson Agonistes to not blame God. He does go through a lot of emotional turmoil, and there are points where he's like, oh, why has God forsaken me? Like, why has he left me to this fate? But he ultimately accepts responsibility and says, no, this must be a reason for it. I have done something wrong. It's not God's fault, because his own father is like really critical of God, and he's like, oh, but he'll reward you for what you've done and your service, and he will give you your sight back. And it's like, no, he won't. So it's very interesting. And Samson's the only one to see this. He's the only one who knows that there is a higher purpose or a higher plan for him because of God. And then the quote the sort of section I used to back this up was from Lodine Chaffee. So, considering his former unique position as God's chosen vessel and his current condition as a blind captive of the Philistines, Samson's words become a way for him to define himself anew. And these thoughts, pointing towards death, become the lens through which Samson imagines his destiny and purpose. Milton's Samson, I suggest, by accepting death and striving towards his mortal end, perhaps paradoxically moves towards self-understanding and places him in a position to choose to obey God. So there's this kind of massive debate surrounding the Samson text, which is to do with the idea of the anti-hero and whether Samson is a hero or not. And it's interesting because Lodine Chaffee is kind of similar in my views, that she's arguing against them, that Samson is an anti-hero whose actions are ethically repellent, because she believes that death is the key, for rather than death being a kind of fixation, because Samson does cause a lot of death. At the end of the text, he leans against the pillars he's performed for this feast of Dagon, or Dagon, however you pronounce it, is like one of the Philistines' gods. and he has to perform this at this festival, like his feats of strength, which he hasn't actually lost despite Delilah's actions. He ends up pulling the pillars, like he rests against a pillar saying he needs to rest, and then he pulls the pillars down with his strength and kills everyone, including himself, inside. So it kind of shows this whole idea that Samson is able to escape through death rather than him being the main causer of death. It actually allows him, though Dean Chafee argues, it allows him to develop a new self-identity, and it kind of ties in with my idea of the visionary once again, because Samson is the only one who knows that that is his way out. All the other characters around him keep trying to say, oh, you know, like, God will redeem you, or God will do this, and he's like, no, God has placed me here for a purpose. And he kind of feels these emotions, and before he goes, he describes it as a motion inside of him, which is supposedly God is telling him to go there and commit this final act. Unlike the false, lustful motions that he had when he ended up getting with his Philistine wife Delilah, or his previous wife before that, it was like he mistook that as a sign from God, where it's like, no, that's just lust. And then we had to sort of give our key terms. So for what we'd used so far for research, so I had Milton, Samson Agonisties, Paradise Lost, Blindness, and then these two which I've ended up taking out due to feedback, which I'll explain in the other video, Disability and Early Modern England. And then we had to also link it with what modules related to it. So I said level 4, Literary Powers, Renaissance to Romanticism. Level 5, Mortals and Immortals, Man, God and the Devil in Early Modern Literature. Level 5, Bloody Shakespeare, Shakespeare's history plays, because it's like the same time period. And Level 6, Dangerous Desires, Renaissance Revenge Drama. And Level 6, Enlightenment Literature, Culture and Modernity, is like, it would be interesting as like a kind of how ideas evolve and stuff and change with the Enlightenment one, because that's after the Renaissance period. But that was just to sort of show how they would tie in, and if there's potential modules we could take in our final year, level 6, to help us. And then finally we had to talk about the potential supervisor we went to see. So I picked my supervisor, who was a lovely lecturer for Mortals and Immortals, Man, God and the Devil, that module, and I gave 3 reasons why. Like, her research specialism is Milton, the actual author that I want to do it on. She has a widespread knowledge of Milton's work. She was the one who sort of helped me come up with the visionary concept, and she pointed me towards Samson Agonisties, because originally I was just going to look at spiritual blindness of Adam and Eve, but I went to her sort of like, I see so many other aspects of blindness, and she's like, well, why don't you explore them then? And I'm like, you've raised a very good point. And then she pointed me to Samson Agonisties, and I loved it. It was brilliant text. And then also enthusiasm for my project. She just seems like really on board with it, and it's different and it's relevant, and it's kind of like through my research I've really discovered that there's many different debates surrounding this text, and blindness sometimes crops up, but I feel like critics don't ever fully engage with it. So I feel like there's a gap for my dissertation that my dissertation project could fill. That's kind of like what I have for the presentation element of it. Anyway, if anyone's watched this, thank you. And what I might do, I might read out my actual script for my presentation that I never got to present, because it would probably make it a lot clearer if I presented it like that. But I just wanted to sort of talk about it. Anyway, if anyone's watched this, thank you. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment below. Bye.